Good evening, I'm Ted Bear.
And I'm Diane.
And welcome to the International Zombie Watch. Today we commemorate the great heroism and tragedy of the zombie war on the 10th anniversary of its end.
We begin tonight with Mary, a woman on the streets, giving us a glimpse into the public reaction to the zombie crisis and reconstruction efforts.
With Lucas, and how do you think we did with the war? Were you affected by it very seriously?
Yeah, I sadly lost all my family. It was really tragic.
It was. I am so sorry for your loss. Are you doing
Thank
well?
you. I'm trying to get through it.
That is heartbreaking. And speaking of getting through it, how do you think we did rebuilding in this war?
I hate to say it, but it looks like we're in a hole.
Really?
Yeah, it's not looking too good.
I see. Well, thank you for your time. It was very insightful.
You're welcome.
And we're here with Shuri. And how did the zombie war affect you?
I lost my parents and I lost my child.
That's horrible. Are you well? Are you doing well?
No, it's been extremely difficult. After the war, I'm by myself. I feel so alone.
This story is so similar to several others. And speaking of moving on and trying to get by, how do you think we've done rebuilding after this tragic event?
We're Americans and we will survive. No zombie attack, no vampire attack, nothing will take our Pledge of Allegiance from us. We love this country.
That was inspirational and moving. You heard it first here, straight from the people.
Thanks, Mary.
Next, we'll hear the eyewitness accounts of many significant individuals involved in the war efforts.
Accompanying the interviews are recovered visual records of the struggles against the walking plague. Air smuggling became big business in the eastern provinces. These were rich clients, the ones who could afford pre-booked travel packages and first-class tourist visas. They would step off the plane at London or Rome or even San Francisco, check into their hotels, go out for a day's sightseeing, and simply vanish into thin air. That was big money. I'd always wanted to break into air transport.
But what about the infection? Wasn't there a risk of being discovered?
That was only later, after Flight 575. Initially, there weren't too many infected taking these flights. If they did, they were in the very early stages. Air transport Shaitow were very careful. If you showed any signs of infection, they wouldn't go near you. They were out to protect their business. The golden rule was you couldn't fool foreign immigration officials until you fooled your Shaitow first. You had to look and act completely healthy, and even then it was always a race against time. Before Flight 575, I heard this one story about a couple, a very well-to-do businessman and his wife. He'd been bitten. Not a serious one, but one of the slow burns, where all the major blood vessels are missed. I'm sure they thought there was a cure in the West. A lot of the infected did. Apparently, they reached their hotel room in Paris just as he began to collapse. His wife tried to call the doctor, but he forbade it. He was afraid they'd be sent back. Instead, he ordered her to abandon him, to leave now before he lapsed into coma. I hear that she did, and after 2 days of groans and commotion, the hotel staff finally ignored the Do Not Disturb sign and broke into the room. I'm not sure if that's how the Paris outbreak started, though it would make sense.
You say they didn't call for a doctor, that they were afraid they'd be sent back, but then why try to find a cure in the West?
You really don't understand a refugee's heart, do you? These people were desperate. They were trapped between their infections and being rounded up and treated by their own government. If you had a loved one, a family member, a child who was infected, and you thought there was a shred of hope in some other country, wouldn't you do everything in your power to get there? Wouldn't you want to believe there was hope?
Those creatures were swarming among the cars. Drivers on the outside lanes tried to veer off the road, sticking in the mud, trapping the inner lanes. People couldn't open their doors. The cars were too highly packed. I saw those things reach in open windows, pulling people out or pulling themselves in. A lot of drivers were trapped inside. Their doors were shut, and I'm assuming locked. Their windows were rolled up. It was safety-tempered glass. The dead couldn't get in, but the living couldn't get out. I saw a few people panic, try to shoot through their windshields, destroying the only protection they had. Stupid. They might have bought themselves a few hours in there, maybe even a chance to escape. Maybe there was no escape, just a quicker end. There was a horse trailer, hitched to a pickup in the center lane. It was rocking crazily back and forth. The horses were still inside. The swarm continued among the cars, literally eating its way up the stalled lines. All those poor bastards just trying to get away, and that's what haunts me most about it. They weren't headed anywhere. This was the I-80, a strip of highway between Lincoln and North Platte. Both places were heavily infested, as well as all those little towns in between. What did they think they were doing? Who organized this exodus? Did anyone? Did people see a line of cars and join them without asking? I tried to imagine what it must have been like, stuck bumper to bumper, crying kids, barking dog, knowing what was coming just a few miles back and hoping, praying that someone up ahead knows where he's going. You ever hear about that experiment in America an American journalist did in Moscow in 1970s? He just lined it up at some building, nothing special about it, just a random door. Sure enough, someone got in line behind him, then a couple more, and before you knew it, they were backed up around the block. No one asked what the line was for. They just assumed it was worth it. I can't say if that story was true. Maybe it's an urban legend, or a Cold War myth. Who knows?
I was a Raptor driver, the FA-22. It was, hands down, the best air superiority platform ever built. It was a monument to American technical prowess. And in this war, that prowess counted for Jack.
That must have been frustrating.
Frustrating? Do you know what it feels like to suddenly be told that the one goal you've worked towards your whole life, that you sacrificed and suffered for, that's pushed you beyond the limits you never knew you had, is now considered strategically invalid?
Would you say this was a common feeling?
Let me put it this way. The Russian army wasn't the only service to be decimated by their own government. The Armed Forces Reconstruction Act basically neutered the Air Force. Oh, some active military facilities were converted to refugee centers, some were still contributing to the war effort, and some had no strategic impact at all. The Army left custodial teams at factories, mines, and power plants to maintain them, in case we had to add them to the war effort. Continental Airlift was about resupplying all the different zones, whether they were Army, civilian, or industrial. It was a massive, dangerous organization. Things went wrong and there were casualties. My plane wasn't even safe. We were going through some turbulence when there was a massive jolt, like God just drop-kicked our tail. I was sucked out of the plane. My brain was misfiring, but I was still able to deploy my chute and make sure my gear was intact.
Did the Air Force prepare you for situations like these?
Well, we all had to pass the Willow Creek Escape and Evade program. Had a lot of good that did when I couldn't even save my co-pilot. 5 of them were tearing into him. I was close enough to touch them, but they didn't even look at me. I at least managed to re-kill them, but I kept my wits. I was so ashamed, so blinded by self-hate because I wasn't doing my job and it was my fault. I could barely keep myself together, I was so angry. But I made it out, mostly.
And now time for weather with Not Ted.
Well, most of the zombies are pretty much gone, as we all know. But, there's still some clusters. I mean, there's some over right there in Wyoming and Evergreen Park, Illinois. And, there's a lot left in Nebraska, because nobody feels like cleaning up Nebraska. And, somebody says there's some in South Dakota, but, South Dakota doesn't exist, so it doesn't matter. And, there's a lot of, zombie actors in California, and I hear, Keanu Reeves just signed on to do a, Bill and Ted's, zombie adventure. And zombie Lindsay Lohan just got a deal for Mean Zombies. So, yeah. That's all.
A fantastic compilation of accounts of the Dakias has been created by Max Brooks, an employee of the United Nations Post-War Commission under the title World War Z, An Oral History of the Zombie War.
I'm Ted Bear.
And I'm Diane.
Thank you, and good night.
Mr. Mayor, the mission burns, the zombies are marching, they close on the square, families are cold, look down at their souls, huddled in camps on the old marble steps of City Hall, faith in their God was all that they've got. across the room, beyond